Bob DeMarco. In football, offensive linemen, centers, tackles, and guards are a vital and key element in a team's success or failure. Here's a bit of retro video from the 1968 and 1969 St. Louis Football Cardinals season highlight films, narrated by Jack Buck.
For the offense, new plays and new ways were all that had to be learned. There was only one new starter on the entire unit. Quarterbacks Jim Hart and Charlie Johnson were protected extremely well by the line, as they were hit an average of less than 2 times a game. Ernie McMillan, number 73. Ken Gray, number 64. Bob DeMarco, number 61. Irv Goody, number 55. And Bob Reynolds, number 71. That's the offensive line, and they had a great year. As the 1969 season came into view, there were reasons to believe it would be a special year. A wealth of stars and starters had returned, and an entire offensive line considered one of the best in football was back. Irv Goody, Ernie McMillan, Bob Reynolds, Bob DeMarco, and Ken Gray. Expectant faces with special hopes.
Bob DeMarco is mentioned almost in passing in those videos. Well, all these years later, we're going to do more than just mention Bob. Tonight, we're inducting him into the St. Louis Sports Hall of Fame. Bob, who played college football at Dayton and Indiana University, he played center, the key man on the offensive line. He was remarkably durable. He played 15 seasons in the National Football League, 9 of those with the football Cardinals, 3 with the Cleveland Browns, 2 with the Miami Dolphins, and at age 37, his last season with the Los Angeles Rams. In 11 of those seasons, Bob started every game. He played in 185 NFL games, starting 163 of them. In 8 seasons, he was named first or second team All-NFL, or as we now know it, All-Pro. He was long considered one of the best centers in the NFL. In 15 seasons, he had just 3 fumbles. And get this, he was credited with 8 fumble recoveries for a loss, yes, a loss of 18 yards. Probably too tired to get up and run. Offensive linemen are rarely noticed or mentioned unless they screwed up, holding, offsides, you know the drill. But tonight, we want to put the spotlight on one of the best. We induct Bob DeMarco into the St. Louis Sports Hall of Fame.
So we go back about a decade from Terry Metcalf, when you were here, came here in '61, the second year that the Cardinals were here after being in Chicago. I guess one of the things is how nice is it to be remembered?
Well, let me put it this way. I turned 80 last week, and it's nice to see my name in the sports page instead of the obituary.
The one thing that was similar and almost identical in some ways is the offensive line you were a part of, and of course with Terry Metcalf, the offensive line that he ran behind. You talk about this all the time, and you saw it in the tape, what a great line that was, maybe a little bit unrecognized for how good it was for a long time.
Well, the problem we had was, I honestly believe we had the best offensive line during the 60s, and then they followed up, Hannafin's group. But I have to say this, that the only guy that would have made the team starting was Dan Dierdorf. There's nobody else in that offensive line that they had would have made it. Sorry, Jimmy. But we started out in '62. Irv was the number 1 draft choice from Kentucky. He was an All-American. As a story, I was a rookie. I made it as a rookie guard, okay, my first year. And then we got called in the Army, came back to training camp, and they had a starting center, Don Gillis. They had Jerry Perry was the field goal kicker, and they had Irv Goody was the number 1 All-American, number 1 draft choice, and he was an All-American center. So 2 weeks into camp, they switched him to center. And Ernie was my roommate, and I said, Ernie, I think they're trying to get rid of me. He said, why? Well, I said, look at the deal. I said, I got hurt down at the college all-star game. So anyway, as the time went on, I was a center, and they cut Don Gillis. Jerry Perry was a field goal kicker, and they switched Irv to tackle. And he's never forgiven me since that time.
So in those years, and the success you had. And of course, Jackie Smith was on that team, Larry Wilson, Hall of Famer. So there was some, I think many people might forget just how good a lot of those teams were, and great names from the past like John David Crow and Bobby Joe Conrad. That was a great time of Cardinal football in a lot of ways.
Well, the thing that we should have had 2 or 3 championships here, no question about it. And the reason we didn't is because Charlie Johnson got hurt. In '65, we were 5-1, and he gets his shoulder hurt. In '66, we're 7-1-1, and we go up to the Giants, and we beat them, but he and I get hurt the same game, but we have 5 games left. We had 2 against Pittsburgh, wasn't very good. Atlanta was a expansion team, and Dallas and Cleveland. We had to win 3 games, and we'd be in the championship. We would have been in the Ice Bowl that Dallas played in, and we lost 4 of the 5. Simply because we didn't have quarterbacks. We had Terry Knopfsinger, and I'll never forget, Bobby Lane was our quarterback coach in '65, and we traded for Terry from Pittsburgh. And he said to me, he says, if we got to use this guy, he says, I'm getting my rights back for Pittsburgh. And it proved true because Terry, nice guy, but he just couldn't do the job. And we had a great ball players here, no question about it. I played in the Super Bowl game with Miami, and I was thinking I was down in New Orleans, and I'm saying to myself, we have better ball players than St. Louis. And that was a sad thing about it, you know. And just going down there, to give an example, I played with some Hall of Famers. I played with Gene Hickerson. I played with Larry Little and Tom Mack. And I'll tell you something right now, of all the offensive lines, I never traded anybody for the offensive line we had, especially Ken Gray. He was probably the toughest man I've ever played with.
We always talk about the way the game has changed. When you go back and look, it lists you as being 248 pounds. A, was that accurate? And B, if it was, and we know that linemen were smaller then than they are today. And so talk about that, the change in the game and just how different it was back then.
Well, every era is different. Back in the 20s and 30s, they played both ways, and they saw us playing one platoon. They said, these guys really aren't that tough. But you have to understand something. Back then, offensive linemen could not extend their arms. It was like this. And then the defensive linemen had the head slaps. So you missed that one, and then the other one came up. So you had to be agile. You couldn't. I call it sumo wrestling now. I mean, these guys weigh 330 pounds. I was 6'3". Right now, I'd weigh 320 pounds if I was going to play, and I couldn't play today. But, I mean, I don't understand the line play they have today because you watch them, they extend their arms, and then they're just grabbing each other. So our game was it was a brutal game. There was no question about it. Plus the fact it wasn't a passing game, it was a running game. And we played Cleveland Browns, and the whole idea against them was if you held Jim Brown under 100 yards, you'd beat them because they have to start passing. So it was more of a physical game because there's more one-on-one back then. And it's a different game. Football's brutal. I mean, the guys just, they talk about CTE. I said, well, you had to be half crazy to play in the NFL anyway. I mean, so that you only have halfway to go to get the CTE. But it was a brutal game. Everybody loved playing it, and the difference between the game when I played, we talked about thousands. They talk about millions. Plus, we used to cash our checks at Walmart. So I mean, it was a little bit different.
You mentioned you mentioned moving on to Miami, where Don Shula was the coach. What were the circumstances when you left the Cardinals after 9 seasons?
Well, I was always dealt with Stormy, and then he sold out to Billy. And I knew I was gone because I saw Red Miller at the airport in February, and he said, for some reason, you're gone, Charlie Johnson's gone, and Ken Gray's gone. That was Charlie Winter. He got rid of the 3 of us. So I had talked to the New York Giants, and I thought I was going to get picked up by them. Instead, Pittsburgh picks me up, and Chuck Noll says to me, he says, Bobby, we're thinking about playing you at tackle. I said, Chuck, I'm not a tackle. I'll play guard for you. But I said, I'm not going to play, tackle. So I go up there, and Dan Rooney's talking to me, and he says, Bob, he says, you're making a lot of money. I said, well, I was all pro and went to a few Pro Bowl games, and I said, you got 3 quarterbacks killed last year with your offensive line. And he said, you're going to throw my salary structure out of whack. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, the highest paid lineman I got is making $21,000. And that was Bruce Van Dyke from Missouri. And I said, well, I don't think I'm going to be here. So the 4th exhibition game, they started me, and Chuck Knoll, I went after the game. I said, Chuck, I'm leaving. He said, what do you mean I'm leaving? I said, well, I'm not going to stay around here 2 more games for you to cut me, because I know I'm not going to be here because my salary was too high. So I left, and that's when he traded me to Miami. And that's when I went down there. And like Don Shula said, he said, Bob, we need you because we got a young offensive line. He said, but if we lose, then you're no use to me. So that's how it worked out.
And you played in the longest game in NFL history, Christmas Day, 1971, against the Cross-State Chiefs.
Exactly, in the old stadium, and that day it was 71 degrees out. And I had all my friends I grew up in New Jersey, and so I got a lot of friends with bookies. And they said, what do you think? And of course, the year before, Kansas City had won the Super Bowl. And we were 10-point underdogs. I said, bet the house. I said, we're going to beat them. And the night before the game, Shula was the kind of coach, we had beer out there, we had hamburgers and stuff, and I said, you guys were just loose. Of course, I didn't know how loose we were going to be. It had lasted almost 6 quarters. If that game today would play, I think it lasted 3 hours and maybe 20 minutes. If they played it today, it'd be 6.5 hours.
True.
So anyway, it was a hell of a game, and when Garrow was going to kick the field goal, I said, Garrow, you got to make this because I can't go anymore. And he finally made it, And it was a heck of a game. In fact, when we got back to Miami, I've never seen anything like this. At the airport, the pilot said, something's going on here. There were 30,000 people that met us at the airport.
Wow.
I mean, it was unbelievable. It really was.
Just for the record, the game was 22 minutes and 40 seconds of overtime. In the second overtime, finally won by the Dolphins on a field goal. Bob DeMarco, great career. Great having you here in the St. Louis Sports Hall of Fame.
Thank you. My pleasure.